Awakening is not gentle. It shakes us loose from the illusions that kept us satisfied with surface joys. It demands that we look deeper, that we hear the whisper of our soul above the noise of the world. Many ask, why do I no longer love the things I once adored? Why does the guitar gather dust, the canvas remain blank, the books stay closed? The truth is this: the person who delighted in those hobbies is no longer here. You have stepped into a new being, a wider vision, and the things that once quenched your thirst may no longer satisfy the ocean you've become. This is not the death of passion. It is the birth of a greater purpose. And so, let us walk together through 7 keynotes that reveal why spiritual people lose interest in their hobbies after awakening. When you awaken, the very ground beneath you shifts, and you realize that the person you thought you were has quietly dissolved. The old self, the one who clung to hobbies, to names, to images in the mirror, has fallen away like autumn leaves stripped by a strong wind. There is a quiet mourning in that, a strange emptiness that creeps in when the things that once carried you no longer seem to hold weight. You may stand in front of the bookshelf filled with novels that once lit up your nights, and now the words seem hollow. You may stare at the guitar in the corner, once your truest companion, and find your fingers no longer yearn for its strings. And you ask yourself, what happened to me? The truth is that nothing has been taken from you. What has been removed is the mask. The old self was built from stories, what your parents told you, what your culture demanded, what your insecurities whispered in the dark. That self needed hobbies, not only for pleasure but for survival. It needed an identity. It needed the painter's brush, the writer's pen, the runner's shoes, because without those titles, it was terrified of being invisible. You called yourself the poet, the musician, the dancer, and you believed those labels made you real. But awakening arrives with thunder and with silence. It tears away those fragile costumes and demands that you stand bare before your own soul. It is not gentle. It does not ask your permission. Suddenly, the hobbies that once filled your heart feel like children's toys in the hands of an adult. They are not bad, not useless, not shameful, but they no longer fit. They belong to someone who has gone. It is like watching an old photograph of yourself, smiling with eyes that no longer belong to you. You see the joy, you see the energy, but you cannot crawl back into that skin. You cannot pretend to be that person again. And when you try, when you pick up the brush or dust off the piano keys, you feel the hollowness, the weight of pretending, and it exhausts you. This is the first truth of awakening. You have died, and yet you still breathe. The hobbies of the old self were not merely pastimes, they were lifelines. They gave you comfort when you could not face silence. They gave you escape when life felt too heavy. They gave you a sense of control in a world where you felt powerless. But now, after awakening, you see through the illusion. You no longer need escape because there is nothing to run from. You no longer crave comfort because you have found the stillness that cannot be shaken. You no longer seek control because you have surrendered to a deeper rhythm, one that guides you beyond your own plans. This is why the old hobbies fall away. They belong to a version of you that was trying to survive. You are no longer surviving. You are becoming. And in that becoming, there is little space for the games of the past. Yet, do not mistake this loss as emptiness. It is transformation. When the caterpillar enters the cocoon, it does not carry its leaves with it. It does not drag along the twig it once clung to. Everything melts. Everything dissolves, and in that dissolution, something extraordinary is born. Your hobbies, your passions, your habits, they are dissolving in the same way. not because they are gone forever, but because they must be reborn in the wings of who you are becoming. Sometimes the people around you will not understand. They will ask, "Why don't you write anymore? Why don't you sing like you used to? Why have you abandoned what made you so alive?" And it will hurt because you will not know how to explain. You will want to say, "I am still alive, perhaps more alive than I have ever been, but the old ways no longer carry my spirit. The old self has died and its hobbies were buried with it. And yet, within you, the embers of joy still glow. You may find one day that the pen calls you back, but this time it will not be to prove your talent or to chase recognition. It will be to let the universe speak through you. You may return to painting, but this time the brush will not be your identity. It will be a channel, a prayer, a release. The old self painted to be seen. The new self paints because it has no choice but to let the colors flow. The falling away of the old self is not the end of creation. It is the purification of it. You are stripped bare so that when you return to the world, you return free. Free from the chains of needing to be someone, needing to be defined, needing to be validated. You will discover a new relationship with everything you once loved, not from the hunger of lack, but from the fullness of being. But before that rebirth, there is the in-between, the space where the old has died and the new has not yet taken shape. This is where many feel lost, disoriented, even depressed. They say, "I don't know who I am anymore. Nothing feels worth doing." And that is true, because the one who used to do has died, and the one who is being born does not yet need to do. This is a season of stillness, of patience, of trust. The hobbies fall away to teach you that your worth was never in what you produced, never in how you entertained yourself, never in the labels you carried. So when you stand there staring at the abandoned guitar, the half-finished canvas, the dusty running shoes, do not grieve. Recognize them as symbols of a life that carried you as far as it could. Honor that old self. Thank it for surviving. Thank it for finding beauty in the midst of illusion. And then release it. Let it go, because what has fallen away is not joy. It is not life. It is only the mask. The one who is left, stripped and trembling, is closer to truth than you have ever been. The old self has fallen away, and in its place, the infinite waits to move through you. There comes a point after awakening when the small joys of yesterday can no longer hold the vastness of who you have become. Before the soul's eyes opened, you were content with surface pleasures, the melody of a favorite song, the thrill of a new hobby, the comfort of distraction. These were beautiful, yes, but they were small cups of water offered to a thirst that has now revealed itself as infinite. Once you taste the ocean, how can a sip from a glass ever satisfy? The truth is not that those pleasures are wrong or meaningless. The truth is that they were never meant to fill you completely. They were stepping stones, glimpses, fragments of a larger wholeness. You may recall the way your heart used to leap when you started a new project, knitting a scarf, strumming a new chord, tasting the rush of learning something unfamiliar. That excitement was real, but it was temporary. It fizzled out once the novelty faded, leaving you searching for the next thrill. This cycle repeated, and you mistook it for fulfillment. Awakening tears the veil from your eyes and shows you the pattern. The surface cannot quench what is eternal. Before awakening, hobbies often serve as bandages. They cover the aching silence within. They give structure to a restless mind, something to hold on to when life feels unstable. And there is nothing wrong with this. It is part of being human. But when the soul awakens, you can no longer be tricked by the temporary. You see clearly that these small activities, though sweet, are like sugar, a burst of energy that cannot sustain the body. The deep soul craves bread water, nourishment that endures. After awakening, you begin to sense the hollowness of shallow pleasures. You may pick up the book that once enchanted you and find your mind wandering. You may sit at the piano and feel no music rising within. You may attempt the old rituals of your joy only to discover that they ring empty, like a drum with a broken skin. It is not that you are broken. It is that you are no longer willing to settle for crumbs when you have glimpsed the feast of infinity. The soul is vast, endless, boundless. Once it awakens, it demands to be fed with truth. Shallow pleasures cannot satisfy because they are fleeting. They come and go, rise and fall, depend on mood, circumstance, or achievement. But the awakened soul longs for something that does not fade. It longs for silence that sings louder than music, stillness that nourishes deeper than conversation, presence that feels richer than any possession. That longing is the hunger of eternity itself, calling you home, and so you lose interest in your hobbies. They were the crumbs that once delighted you, but now the hunger has shifted. At first, this feels like loss. It feels like joy has abandoned you. But what has truly happened is that your soul has grown. A child is thrilled by toys, but an adult no longer finds satisfaction in them. Not because toys are bad, but because the heart has expanded to crave something more meaningful. The same is true of the spiritual path. Your soul has outgrown shallow pleasures. In this stage, many feel disoriented. They say, "Why don't I enjoy what I used to? Why does nothing make me happy anymore?" But the answer is not that happiness is gone. It is that your definition of happiness is being rewritten. What once entertained you is no longer enough. You are learning to distinguish between distraction and nourishment. Think of a river flowing into the sea. For a time, the river runs narrow and fast, twisting through valleys and hills. Its waters are lively, playful, and contained by banks. That was your life before awakening, defined, contained, full of small joys along the way. But when the river meets the sea, everything changes. It expands into something boundless, something far greater than itself. It can no longer be held by the banks. The river has become ocean, and the ocean cannot be satisfied by the amusements of the stream. This is what happens to you. Your spirit, once content with streams of pleasure, has entered the ocean of awareness, and shallow joys cannot fill an ocean. The ocean craves depth, craves wholeness, craves the taste of infinity. This does not mean hobbies will never return. In fact, some do return, but in a transformed way. A painter may pick up the brush again, but now each stroke is not for recognition or entertainment. It is an offering, a meditation, a way of letting the universe move through them. A musician may sing again, but no longer for applause. Instead, the song becomes a prayer, a vibration of spirit itself. The hobby is no longer shallow. It has been deepened, sanctified, made holy by the awakened soul. But until that transformation arrives, there is often a period of emptiness. The old joys no longer fit, and the new joys have not yet fully revealed themselves. This in-between space feels like drifting, like walking through life without color. Yet this emptiness is sacred. It is the soil in which deeper fulfillment can grow. The shallow must fall away before the deep can be received. You may be tempted to force yourself back into old pleasures, to reignite the hobbies that no longer call you, but you cannot trick the soul once it has seen the truth. You may paint, but your heart will feel restless. You may play, but the music will not soothe you, because the soul refuses to settle, refuses to shrink itself back into the narrow walls of shallow pleasure. This is a gift, though it feels like a burden. It is your soul protecting you from smaller versions of joy, pushing you toward the vastness it knows is waiting. It is the universe saying, you were never meant to be filled by fragments. You were meant to overflow with wholeness. So when you lose interest in your hobbies, understand. It is not a failure, not a weakness, not a sign that something is wrong. It is the sign of a deeper hunger, a hunger that will not be satisfied by distractions, but only by truth. And when you finally surrender to that hunger, you will discover that the soul is not empty at all. It is waiting, open, ready to drink from the eternal stream that no hobby, no pastime, no fleeting pleasure could ever provide. There comes a time after the spirit has awakened when you realize that all the doing in the world cannot compare to the quiet power of simply being. Before that awakening, your days were filled with activity, with motion, with the endless pursuit of tasks that made you feel alive, made you feel accomplished, made you feel as if you had a purpose. You took comfort in hobbies, in projects, in routines. They gave you structure and identity. They gave you the sense that life was moving forward because you were always moving. But after awakening, something changes. The movement that once thrilled you now feels like noise. The doing that once defined you now feels heavy, almost unnecessary. For the first time, you recognize that presence alone has more value than the busiest day of accomplishments. Before awakening, you did not know how to rest without guilt. Silence felt uncomfortable. Stillness felt like laziness. You thought you had to fill your hours with hobbies and tasks to justify your existence. If you were not writing, painting, singing, cooking, or creating something, you believed you were wasting time. But awakening shatters that illusion. It reveals that life itself is not a series of things to accomplish. It is a state of being to experience. You begin to see that the act of breathing, of sitting in sunlight, of hearing the song of a bird, carries more truth and nourishment than all the hobbies you once clung to. This shift is unsettling at first. You may feel restless, unsure of what to do with yourself when the desire to do disappears. You may sit in the chair where you once sketched for hours and find your hands empty. You may stare at the garden where you once dug and planted and feel no urge to move the soil. And in that stillness, a voice inside may whisper, "Am I losing myself? Am I losing the spark that made me who I am?" But what you are truly losing is the illusion that doing gives you worth. You are discovering that your worth is intrinsic, eternal, untouched by activity or inactivity. Being is not nothingness. Being is fullness. It is not the absence of action, but the presence of awareness. When you shift from doing to being, you begin to feel the richness of life in every breath. You start to notice the sacredness in the ordinary. The cup of tea in your hand becomes a universe of warmth and aroma. The silence of a morning becomes a cathedral of peace. The beating of your own heart becomes a rhythm of eternity. These experiences are not created by hobbies or tasks. They are revealed by stillness. The world will not always understand this shift. Others may see you and say, "You used to be so passionate. You used to be so busy. Why have you stopped?" They will measure your life by output, by productivity, by the visible evidence of your doing. And you will smile because you know now that life is not measured by the things you produce, but by the depth of your presence. You may not be painting canvases, but you are painting every moment with awareness. You may not be writing books, but you are writing truth into the silence of your being. This shift is not about abandoning action forever. It is about no longer being enslaved by it. When you live in being, action flows naturally, effortlessly, without force. You may still paint, still sing, still dance, but not to escape yourself, not to prove yourself, not to keep yourself busy. You do it as an extension of being, as a celebration rather than a necessity. The doing becomes an offering rather than an obligation. Imagine the river. When it rushes in frenzy, it stirs up mud and stones, clouding its own waters. That was your life in doing, constant motion, constant activity, but often restless, often muddy. When the river slows, when it rests in its own flow, the waters clear, and in the stillness you can see all the way to the bottom. That is your life in being, clear, calm, transparent, aligned with the truth that was always there. From this place, action does not disappear. It becomes pure, flowing from clarity instead of chaos. There is a quiet power in those who live from being. You can feel it in their presence. They do not need to speak much, and yet their silence speaks volumes. They do not need to fill the room with activity, because their presence fills it with peace. They have shifted from chasing life to embodying life, and that shift radiates. It touches everyone around them without a single effort. The reason hobbies often fall away after awakening is because many of them were tied to doing. They gave you the illusion of progress, the illusion of identity, but now the need to prove, the need to define, the need to distract yourself with endless activity has dissolved. You are no longer afraid of stillness. You are no longer uncomfortable with silence. You have discovered that life itself is enough, and from this place, you may rediscover hobbies in a completely new way. You may find yourself painting again, but not as the painter, just as a soul in flow. You may sing again, but not as the singer, just as a heart expressing sound. You may walk in the garden, but not as the gardener, simply as a being who loves the feel of earth. The difference is profound. You are no longer doing to be. You are being, and doing flows naturally from that state. This shift is the great turning of awakening, the realization that you do not need to run after life, because life is already within you. The doing fades, the being rises, and in that rising you find a peace that no hobby, no achievement, no external recognition could ever provide. When the soul awakens, one of the first things it does is strip you bare of the costumes you have worn for so long. These costumes are the identities you have carried, the masks you believed were your face, the names you clung to as if they were your essence. They are the badges of the world: teacher, artist, writer, athlete, mother, leader, dreamer. They are not false in themselves, but they are temporary, fragile, and they do not contain the full truth of who you are. Before awakening, these identities gave you comfort. They gave you a sense of belonging, a place in the world's story. They gave you a way to answer the question, who are you? But after awakening, those answers fall flat. They no longer hold power. The soul whispers that you are more than every title, more than every label, more than every role you have ever played. This is where detachment begins. The painter who once introduced themselves as an artist finds that the title feels hollow. The runner who once measured worth in miles suddenly feels no need to prove endurance. The writer who poured identity into words feels no urgency to define themselves through pages. Hobbies, passions, careers, all of them are seen for what they are. Beautiful expressions of life, but not the life itself. You realize you are not the roles you play. You are the one who exists before the role begins and after the role ends. Detachment from worldly identities is not rejection, it is liberation. You are not asked to throw away your gifts or deny your talents. You are invited to stop confusing them with your essence. For so long you thought, if I am not a singer, who am I? If I am not a teacher, who am I? If I am not a parent, who am I? Awakening answers, you are, not this or that, not confined by words, not trapped in definitions. You are presence itself, vast and unshakable. When this truth arrives, hobbies often lose their hold, because hobbies are usually tied to identity. The person who loved to cook did not only cook, they became the cook. The person who danced did not only dance, they became the dancer. The hobby became more than joy. It became an identity, a way to be seen, to be valued, to belong. But when the soul awakens and no longer seeks external validation, the attachment to the identity dissolves. The joy of the hobby may remain or it may fall away, but it is no longer burdened with the weight of defining you. This detachment can be frightening at first. You may feel as if you are losing yourself. The mirror reflects a face, but the name attached to it feels distant. People around you still call you by your old identities, still expect you to play the part you once embraced. And when you no longer fit those roles, it can confuse them. They may say, "You've changed. You're not the person I used to know." And in truth, they are right. The person they knew was a mask. The self you have discovered is something they cannot easily categorize, but do not fear this loss. To detach from worldly identities is to step into freedom. Imagine carrying heavy cloaks layered upon you, each identity another fabric draped across your shoulders. They may have been beautiful, embroidered with the colors of talent and achievement, but they were heavy nonetheless. Awakening is like slipping out of those cloaks, one by one, until you stand light and unburdened. You do not need to carry the weight of being someone. You can finally rest in simply being. And yet this detachment does not make you less human. It makes you more human. When you are no longer bound by identity, you can step into any role with freedom. You can paint without needing to be an artist. You can teach without needing to be a teacher. You can parent without needing to be defined by parenthood. The action becomes pure expression, unchained from ego. This is when hobbies sometimes return, not as labels, but as offerings. You may find yourself singing again, but now the song is not tied to being a singer. It is simply an expression of breath, of joy, of presence. This is why the loss of interest in hobbies after awakening feels both confusing and liberating. You are not rejecting the activity itself. You are releasing the identity attached to it. The soul cannot be contained by categories. It refuses to be limited by names. And so the old ways of introducing yourself, the old ways of defining your worth, dissolve. You no longer need to say, "I am this," or "I am that." You stand in the power of simply being. This detachment also shifts your relationship with others. Before awakening, you clung to your identity so others would know how to relate to you. You wore your labels proudly, hoping they would grant respect, admiration, or belonging. After awakening, you realize that true connection does not come from shared identities, but from shared presence. You no longer need to prove who you are. You no longer need to be seen as successful, talented, or accomplished. You no longer need to hold on to an identity in order to feel real. You simply are. And in that simplicity, connection becomes deeper, more authentic, more human. Of course, the world will continue to insist on identities. Society thrives on categories, on roles, on definitions. You will still be asked, "What do you do?" You will still be introduced as the artist or the teacher, but within yourself, you will no longer be tied to those names. You will smile knowing those are temporary garments, useful for the moment, but not the truth of your soul. The truth cannot be spoken. It can only be lived. So the detachment from worldly identities is not a loss, but a return. It is the return to the self before it was named, before it was shaped by expectations, before it was divided into roles. It is the return to the essence that simply exists, silently radiant, needing no title to shine. When awakening enters your life, it does not come to leave you where you are. It arrives to shift your gaze, to turn your heart from what once entertained you toward what now sustains you. Before awakening, your hobbies and passions felt like the center of your world. They gave you excitement, distraction, even identity. But after awakening, those things fall silent, not because they were unworthy, but because your soul has grown hungrier. It now seeks a higher purpose, something that feeds not just the mind or the body, but the eternal spirit within you. This search for higher purpose often begins as a kind of restlessness. You look at your life and see the routines you once cherished, the hobbies you once pursued with fire, and you notice they no longer spark the same joy. What once thrilled you now feels small, shallow, fleeting. It is not that painting, writing, or gardening suddenly lose their beauty. It is that you begin to feel they are no longer enough. The soul begins to whisper, there must be more. There must be something deeper, something lasting, something that matters beyond myself. At first, this longing can feel like emptiness. You may feel as though you are drifting, that nothing excites you anymore. This is not failure, nor is it depression in the usual sense. It is the natural ache of the spirit when it begins to outgrow the confines of personal pleasure. You are being drawn to a higher horizon, though you may not yet see what lies there. The hobbies fall away to make space for something greater to emerge. This higher purpose is not always a grand mission or a dramatic calling. Sometimes it is simple, quiet, almost invisible to the world. It may be the shift from creating art to seeking how your art can heal others. It may be the change from enjoying music for yourself to using music to uplift those who suffer. It may be the realization that your joy is not complete unless it also nourishes those around you. Awakening expands the circle of your care. What was once about me becomes about us. The soul cannot rest in self-centered pleasures once it has glimpsed its connection to all beings. The search for higher purpose also dissolves ambition as you once knew it. Before, ambition was about achieving more, owning more, proving more. You sought goals because they gave you a sense of importance. After awakening, the question shifts. It is no longer what can I achieve, but how can I serve? How can my life bring light, even in small ways? The hobbies that once fed your ego no longer satisfy because the soul now longs to feed the collective heart. And yet this search is not always clear. You may feel as though the old life has ended, but the new one has not yet appeared. The hobbies are gone. The passions have faded, but the higher purpose has not yet revealed itself. This in-between space can be frightening. You may feel useless, uncertain, stripped of direction, but in truth, this is the sacred space of gestation. The seed has been planted, but it has not yet broken through the soil. The search for higher purpose requires patience. The soul must first empty itself of the small before it can hold the vast. Often, higher purpose is revealed not in flashes of brilliance, but in quiet steps. You may be called to listen more deeply to others, to offer kindness in places where it is scarce, to radiate peace in a world hungry for calm. Sometimes your higher purpose is not a task at all, but a presence. Simply existing in your awakened state becomes service, because those around you feel the light you carry. A calm heart becomes a gift. A listening ear becomes a medicine. A silent prayer becomes a ripple across the unseen waters of existence. For some, the search leads to tangible action, teaching, healing, creating, building. For others, it leads to a way of being that infuses every moment with quiet significance. Both are valid, both are sacred. The essence of higher purpose is not in its scale, but in its sincerity. The smallest act born of love holds more weight than the grandest achievement born of ego. Awakening shifts your compass to this truth, and suddenly the hobbies that once entertained you pale in comparison to the calling of the soul. There is also humility in this search. The higher purpose is not chosen by the ego, it is revealed by the Spirit. You cannot force it, you cannot design it with logic. You can only prepare yourself by listening, by waiting, by surrendering. The hobbies fall away so that you are no longer distracted, no longer clinging to old forms of satisfaction. The emptiness becomes the canvas on which the universe paints your deeper calling, and when it does appear, it may surprise you. The one who once spent hours painting alone may discover purpose in teaching children how to see beauty in colors. The one who once sang for applause may discover purpose in singing to comfort the dying. The one who once gardened for peace may discover purpose in growing food for the hungry. The activity itself may look familiar, but its spirit has changed completely. What was once done for self is now done for all. What was once a hobby becomes a channel for love. This is why the loss of interest in hobbies after awakening is not the end of joy, but the redirection of joy. It is the soul clearing space for something more enduring. The small joys of doing are replaced by the great joy of serving, of embodying, of aligning your life with something larger than yourself. This is the search for higher purpose, the longing to be not just a drop in the ocean, but a wave that carries the ocean forward. And so the silence you feel now, the disinterest in old hobbies, is not emptiness at all. It is invitation. It is the soul saying, there is more for you. There is something deeper, truer, more aligned with who you really are. Trust the silence. For in that silence, the higher purpose is being born. When awareness expands through awakening, the world does not change, yet everything appears transformed. The same trees still stand. The same sky stretches overhead. The same faces pass you on the street. And yet, nothing is the same. Your eyes are no longer bound to surfaces. They begin to see beneath, behind, and within. What once seemed ordinary begins to shimmer with depth. The book you once read for entertainment now feels shallow because you can see through the words into the silence between them. The hobby that once gave you joy now feels limited because you can sense the vastness of creation itself beyond the brush, the pen, or the instrument. This is the expansion of awareness, and it is both liberating and disorienting. Before awakening, your attention was narrow. You could lose yourself in the small joys of a pastime because your world was contained within the boundaries of the mind and body. The game, the craft, the song, all of these were worlds in themselves. They consumed your focus, and within them you found temporary fulfillment. But when awareness expands, you realize that those worlds are only fragments of a much greater reality. The hobby may still be beautiful, but it no longer feels sufficient. The canvas is too small for the vision you now hold. You begin to sense the interconnectedness of all things. The bird's song is not just music, it is part of the great symphony of existence. The river's flow is not just water moving downhill, it is the rhythm of life itself, echoing the blood in your veins. The silence you once overlooked is no longer empty, it is alive with presence. And when you experience this vastness, the hobbies that once absorbed you may feel like tiny containers trying to hold an ocean. Your spirit cannot shrink itself back to fit inside them. This expansion can bring a deep peace, but also a kind of grief. You may look at the hobbies you once loved and wonder why they no longer pull you in. You may try to force yourself back into them, but they feel like shoes 2 sizes too small. The joy has not disappeared. It has simply spread out, dissolving from one small activity into every corner of life. What once was contained in a single act of creation is now present in the whole of existence. Awareness reveals layers you never noticed before. You do not just see a flower, you sense its entire journey from seed to blossom, from soil to sunlight, from fragrance to decay. You do not just sip tea, you taste the rain that fell on distant hills, the hands that picked the leaves, the fire that boiled the water. The mind once overlooked these details, but the awakened awareness cannot help but perceive them. This depth makes ordinary life extraordinary, yet it also makes certain hobbies seem shallow by comparison. Why spend hours escaping into a distraction when life itself has become so endlessly rich? And yet, this shift does not mean you must abandon creativity or pleasure. It means that your relationship with them changes. The hobby is no longer the source of depth. It becomes one expression of the depth already present. When you paint, you are not simply making an image, you are letting the universe express itself through color and form. When you sing, you are not just performing a song, you are vibrating with the rhythm of creation. Every act, no matter how small, becomes infused with a wider awareness. The doing is no longer about achieving or entertaining, it is about embodying awareness itself. Still, in the early stages of this expansion, there is often discomfort. The mind misses the simplicity of the old ways. It longs for the days when hobbies were enough to fill the heart. You may feel restless, as though life has lost its color, not realizing that what has truly happened is that life has become too vast for the old colors to contain. It takes time to adjust, to learn how to live with this expanded awareness. It is like moving from a small room into a boundless sky. At first, you miss the walls, the furniture, the cozy familiarity. The openness feels overwhelming, almost lonely, but gradually you begin to see the freedom in it. You no longer need to confine yourself to a single corner. The whole sky is yours. This is what happens when awareness expands. You mourn the loss of the room, but eventually you rejoice in the gift of the horizon. As awareness deepens, compassion also blossoms. You cannot separate yourself from others as easily as before. The expansion of awareness reveals that their joys and sorrows are connected to yours. Their suffering echoes in your heart, their laughter lifts your spirit. This interconnectedness may make old hobbies feel self-centered or trivial. It is not that they are wrong, but that they do not satisfy the soul's longing to embrace the whole. You may feel drawn instead to activities that reflect this larger awareness: service, meditation, communion with nature, or simply the practice of presence. This shift can sometimes confuse those around you. They may wonder why you no longer chase the same passions, why the things that once lit up your eyes now leave you quiet. They may interpret your stillness as apathy, when in truth it is fullness. You are not empty of joy, you are saturated with it, but in a way that cannot always be expressed through hobbies or projects. The expansion of awareness makes joy less about doing and more about being, less about grasping and more about flowing. Over time, hobbies may return, but not as they were. You may paint again, but now each brushstroke feels like communion. You may play music again, but now each note feels like a prayer. You may garden again, but now each seed feels like a miracle. The expansion of awareness does not destroy your passions, it transfigures them. They are no longer shallow pleasures trying to fill an emptiness. They are rivers flowing out of the ocean of your being. The great gift of expanded awareness is that it frees you from the need to cling to fragments. You no longer depend on a single hobby to give you joy, because joy now permeates everything. You no longer need an identity tied to your doing, because your being itself radiates meaning. Awareness makes life so vast, so interconnected, so holy, that the small pleasures of the past seem pale, And yet, within this vastness, nothing is truly lost. Everything is included. Everything belongs. Everything is part of the great unfolding. When the soul passes through awakening, joy does not vanish forever. It only changes its clothing. In the beginning, it may feel as though delight has been stripped away. The familiar hobbies that once brought laughter and light no longer hold the same sweetness. The books, the games, the crafts, the gatherings, what once tasted like honey now feels bland on the tongue. This loss can be heavy, almost unbearable, as though color has drained from the world. Yet the truth is not that joy has died, but that it is preparing to be reborn in unexpected ways. The old joys were tied to identity, to habit, to the self that no longer fits you. The new joys wait quietly, ready to bloom from the deeper soil of your awakened being. At first, you may resist. You may search for the old sparks, returning to your hobbies again and again, trying to feel what you once felt. But no matter how much you try, the thrill is gone. This is the moment when many people despair, fearing that life has become dull or meaningless. Yet if you listen closely in those moments, you may hear a whisper in the silence. Do not look where you have already looked. Joy has moved. Follow me elsewhere. This is how joy begins to lead you to new paths. It does not shout. It does not announce itself. It simply waits in the quiet, guiding you with subtle nudges. One of the first places joy is often reborn is in simplicity. What you once overlooked suddenly becomes radiant. A sunrise, once a backdrop to your hurried day, now feels like a gift wrapped in light. The laughter of a child, the rustling of leaves, the smell of rain on dry earth, these small moments swell with a richness that hobbies alone never gave. Joy no longer requires performance or achievement. It arrives uninvited in the ordinary. You find yourself smiling at the way light falls across the floor or the way silence holds you at night. These are not entertainments, but revelations, signs that joy is no longer dependent on doing, but flows directly from being. Another unexpected rebirth of joy comes through connection. Before awakening, relationships may have been a mix of need and exchange, a dance of expectation and desire. After awakening, as awareness expands, the simple act of being with another soul becomes a source of wonder. A conversation with a stranger may leave your heart glowing. Sitting quietly with a friend may feel like a sacred ritual. The presence of others without roles, without masks, without conditions becomes a wellspring of joy. What hobbies once provided through distraction, people now provide through authentic presence. Nature, too, becomes a doorway for reborn joy. The tree outside your window is no longer just wood and leaves. It is a living teacher standing patient and rooted. The ocean is not just waves, but eternity moving before your eyes. These acts are not hobbies in the old sense. They are expressions of your being, raw and unpolished. The joy is not in the product, but in the freedom of the flow. Even in silence, joy finds you. What once felt like emptiness becomes fullness. Sitting quietly with no agenda, you begin to feel the warmth of existence itself, as though life is holding you gently. This is a joy not tied to objects, activities, or people. It is joy in its purest form, arising from within, needing no cause. It is the joy of simply being alive, awake, and aware. This joy cannot be taken away, for it is not dependent on the world. It is born of your essence. What makes this rebirth of joy so profound is that it often comes when you least expect it. You may be walking down a street and suddenly feel your heart swell with gratitude for no reason. You may hear a bird call and feel tears of wonder welling up. You may wake in the morning and feel joy simply because you have breath. These surprises remind you that joy was never truly lost. It was only waiting for you to be ready to meet it on a deeper level. The hobbies you left behind were never the true source of your happiness. They were only doors through which joy entered for a time. Awakening closes those doors, but only so that you can see joy pouring in from every direction without limits. It no longer hides inside special activities, but dances freely across all of life. In the end, this rebirth of joy is not about replacing old hobbies with new ones. It is about discovering that joy was never bound to hobbies at all. It lives within you, waiting to be recognized in every breath, every glance, every heartbeat. So when you find yourself no longer thrilled by the passions that once defined you, do not grieve. Do not think joy has abandoned you. Instead, recognize it as a holy invitation to step beyond the small joys into the infinite well of being. You are not losing hobbies, you are gaining wholeness. The music may have stopped, but the silence it leaves behind carries the rhythm of eternity. The brush may rest, but the canvas of your soul is already painted with the colors of the divine. And the hobbies you left behind, they were never lost. They were stepping stones carrying you here into the truth of who you have always been.